With our conversation about surrogacy and the Law Commission proposals that we've seen exclusively, which suggests that there might be some lifting of restrictions around surrogacy in this country. Let me introduce you to Natalie Gamble, who is from a not-for-profit surrogacy agency in this country. She also runs a commercial family law firm which specialises in surrogacy. And Natalie supports these new plans, including lifting the ban on advertising for surrogates and plans to pay surrogates more than just expenses. Also with us, Julie Bindell, women's rights campaigner. She's studied and written extensively about surrogacy. Julie is against all forms of surrogacy as she thinks it exploits women. And in Glasgow, Dr. Gillian Wright, a hospital doctor turned expert in medical ethics, who thinks the situation as it is in the UK at the moment is acceptable, doesn't agree with any form of commercialisation of surrogacy. Welcome all of you. I'm going to show the kind of advert that you can get in America, and we'll show it to our audience as well. It says, "Be passionate in helping couples who could not bear a child. Help them to have a family." And then it goes on to talk about how much a potential surrogate could earn in fees. We offer at least $55,000 up to $80,000. Julie, this is the kind of advert you get for surrogates in the US. What would be wrong with having those adverts here?
Well, we already see exploitation of young women, of desperate women, of poor women, and this is what we're talking about. We can see the altruistic surrogate as the poster girl, the atypical poster girl in this scenario. Surrogacy is a trade. It's a nasty trade. It operates in some ways like the global sex trade, in that women's bodies are used and abused. The women are seen as vessels. Often there's trafficking for surrogacy. There are women that I've met, not just in India and the Ukraine, where I've been, where the situation is clearly desperate because they're poor countries, but also in California, where women, often military wives who have been through domestic violence, who are homeless, who are bullied into surrogacy by their husbands, will actually do this, thinking that this will solve all their problems.
But are you saying there's exploitation in this country?
Absolutely. Surrogacy is a trade. It's a commercial trade. It's a financial trade. Therefore, there's huge amounts of exploitation because the inside of a woman's body is being used as a workplace, and actually...
Only if the woman agrees.
Well, if you look at all other forms of exploitation, you don't have a gun to your head necessarily to involve yourself in this. And in fact, if you look at what women are earning in California, which is seen as a huge amount, and everybody says, this is great, how can you prevent this woman from earning this money? And for me, this isn't about preventing the woman from doing anything, it's preventing the profiteers and the so-called intended parents. She's earning less than $4 an hour. Okay,
let me bring in Natalie. Why would you be happy with ads that we just saw there on Instagram and Facebook encouraging young women to become surrogates?
Well, I think the advertising restrictions were written in 1985 and there's never been a prosecution under them. So we're already seeing advertising online around surrogacy.
Does that mean we should legalise it then, because it's already happening underground?
The focus really of the Law Commission's recommendations are that we provide more protections for women going into surrogacy to make sure that they're doing it on an informed basis. And it's that kind of counterbalance of making sure that there are those proper safeguards at the beginning. And
what do you say to Julie's points about exploitation? It's a trade.
Yeah.
It's treating women as vessels.
I think that just doesn't reflect the experience of surrogacy that we see. I mean, I would love Julie to meet some of the many surrogates that we work with who do this because they really want to help someone else have a family, and they find it an incredibly empowering and rewarding experience to...
Look, as I say, they're the atypical poster girls. There are people that smoke 60 cigarettes a day and never get lung cancer. There are the happy hookers who say that the prostitution experience, for example, because surrogacy is like the sex trade, have never met a nasty client. The women that I've met, and as I say, in the global north, in rich countries, as well as the developing world, have to sign contracts, are bullied throughout their pregnancy to do what the so-called intended parents, who I call the baby buyers, want them to do. The babies are born by caesarean section so that the intended parents can turn up on the day that they want their produce, their merchandise to be delivered.
Come back on that.
That's just not the reality of lived experience with surrogacy in the UK at all. You know, surrogates and parents form these incredible bonds, and there's been research from Cambridge University about long-term outcomes for children, which are very good, and for surrogates. Excuse
me, Natalie, but the outcomes are and I quote from the research findings, that it's only really as traumatic for the children further down the line born of surrogacy as adoption. Well, adoption is actually a fairly traumatic experience also.
That's
can't
not the case
measure
at all.
that.
These children are loved and wanted, and they
And
thrive
they're
in the
bought,
families.
they are purchased. And even the altruistic surrogacy that we see as I say, the poster girl, the women go through hell of separating themselves from those babies when they have to see them in their families or their friendship groups, and often these relationships break up and break down, as we've seen from the film that you had at the beginning.
Just not the case. I mean, we've dealt with more than 1,000 surrogacy arrangements and a tiny fraction of breakdowns. You know, surrogates have very positive relationships with the parents and the children in the long term.
Let me ask you this. Hang on, I want to ask you about
surrogacy.
You run a company which is a not-for-profit agency which charges £15,000 to match potential parents with a surrogate, and you provide related services, legal advice, counselling and so on. How do you justify that cost?
So we set up Brilliant Beginnings because through the legal work we've done around surrogacy, we saw the difficulties that parents and surrogates were getting into around informal arrangements and parents going overseas, and we wanted to make things better. This is a labour of love for us.
Well, it's not if you're charging £15,000.
It's charged on a non-profit basis, and it covers the extraordinary time that we spend screening people, preparing them for the process, making sure that there's counselling,
and just to explain what not-for-profit means, because as I understand it, there's no cap on the salary that you pay yourself, for example, or your staff.
So we cover our costs, and obviously our team who come to work and do all this work supporting parents and surrogates are paid for their time.
But you're not a charity though, and this is how I've often heard those that profit from surrogacy describe themselves. They don't quite use that term, but it's very misleading. There's a huge amount of money to be made from this, and often the women are paid a pittance compared to what they're promised. They're exploited into surrogacy by abusive husbands. They are desperate. I'm sure that many of your viewers will be sitting there thinking, this isn't exactly how I'd like to earn a living. Going through a pregnancy, and especially when pregnancy is dangerous, because remember, implanting an embryo that's alien to your DNA, the body will try to reject it. We've seen just 2 weeks ago a woman dying in childbirth who was a surrogate. She left 2 children of her own behind. We know that there are women who...
OK, let Natalie respond and then I'll bring in Gillian.
So the whole purpose of the service that we provide is to keep women safe and to keep parents safe and to protect the best interests of children. And we spend a huge amount of time and effort to make sure that women really understand the risks of what they're going into, that they're making a free choice to do that.
They can't
and that they're
the
healthy. And the kind of women that act as surrogates find it incredibly degrading that other women are saying that they don't know their own minds. This is something they want to do to help someone else.
I certainly haven't
those
said
Law
that.
Commission proposals, they argue there will be more protection for women because at the moment there is no obligation for, let me finish, there is no obligation for intended parents to provide legal advice or counselling for their surrogates. And under these plans, there will be. That's got to be a good thing.
It will not happen. There can't be protection when we're talking about the major health risks from the women who sell eggs. We call them egg donors. Young women sell their eggs. Intended parents look through catalogues and they choose eggs and then they choose the womb to plant it into. Like this is some kind of like going out and buying a car. The women cannot be protected by this because there will always be exploiters in this trade.
Okay.
I can't think of anyone who would run a surrogacy trade for profit that isn't an exploiter.
I'm going to read some comments from you in a moment, although I just can't find them this second. But so let me bring in Dr. Gillian Wright, a hospital doctor turned expert in medical ethics. You were involved in some sense in this consultation, unlike other groups, women's rights groups and so on. What do you think of these proposals?
I think they are difficult in that they shift the balance from of power towards the intended parents rather than to the surrogate mother, and I think that's a really important and difficult step that's been taken forward. We are really concerned about the welfare of the surrogate mother and her interests, and we're really concerned that power is instead being given to that of the intended parents. So, for example, legal parenthood is no longer going to be the prerogative of the surrogate mother, but that of the intended parents. And I guess we are concerned that there has been a shift, particularly from a medical ethics perspective. We would want there to be really robust informed consent when women are taking this step to be surrogate mothers, and we want them to know that on. I think your piece was very representative. There are many successful and safe pregnancies, but there are pregnancies which are extremely high risk, and the recent death in California does bring that into point.
Do you think there is a risk of, if the restrictions on ads are banned, if intended parents are allowed to pay more than reasonable expenses, is there a risk that young women, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, who've never had a baby in the past, could be potentially exploited, as Julie Bindel says?
I think it's interesting that this seems to be what happens in most countries, and I think we need to learn lessons from other countries. So India has recently banned commercial surrogacy because it was serving as a place where people were seeking out surrogates, and young women were being abused by tourists who were seeking them for a baby. And I think
could that happen in this country?
I think it certainly could. I think if we are providing a framework for commercial surrogacy, then we're letting that potential open.
Okay. This texter says, I have carried 2 babies for 2 different couples. They weren't my eggs or my husband's sperm, so I didn't have the same emotional attachment that I've had to my own children. If it had been my egg, then I know I couldn't have done it. To me, it was like I was holding someone else's baby for a while, and then I gave it back. Both times were very happy, emotional events that brought great happiness to 3 people, and they send me regular updates. AJ on Twitter says, this is the Handmaid's Tale version in 2020. Women's bodies are not for sale. It's disgraceful and disgusting exploitation. Maddie tweets this, I'm an altruistic UK surrogate, currently 14 weeks pregnant. I do this to help amazing people become parents who wouldn't otherwise be able to, not for money. Moving towards a commercial model will, however, lead to exploitation on both sides. John says surrogacy should be made illegal. If anyone who cannot have a child can adopt, there are plenty of children that are in need of a good home. Why do you think it has been made illegal in certain European countries, but not here?
I mean, it's illegal in many European countries, and what we see is parents from those countries go overseas to other destinations, so it doesn't prevent surrogacy from happening. In the UK, we take a more middle path, and we want to make sure that it's done properly. And I think it's really important to stress that the whole purpose of the Law Commission recommendations is to make surrogacy safer. It is happening, and we want to provide those protections to make sure that surrogates and children and parents going into these arrangements are better protected.
What would be your message? What would be your message to politicians who will ultimately make any decision on future regulations around surrogacy?
Well, don't further normalise surrogacy. Let's make it illegal in all of the countries where people are going to exploit those women. Stop saying that this is something that is a right for people to have their own child grown in another woman's womb, and let's put money into counselling for those women and men who think that their lives are at an end if they can't have their own children.
Okay, thank you all very much. Appreciate your conversations this morning. And of course, feel free to continue getting in touch. It's victoria@bbc.co.uk. I'm just going to bring you this breaking news, if I may. It's from the Grenfell Inquiry, which